The views and opinions expressed during this broadcast do not necessarily reflect the beliefs of this radio station, its management, or its sponsors. Listeners are urged to use their own discernment to draw their own conclusions.
Good morning to you. Welcome into the Hour of Power. I'm Ryan O'Neill.
And I'm Andrah Polanis. This is the Hour of Power, where we take a little time to read the Bible.
We don't just read the Bible.
We read the Bible. Yes, and we like to talk about some of the little details that other people won't talk about or don't talk about or you know, typically go unnoticed and get overlooked and everything.
Exactly.
You know,
it's Thursday.
It is. It's Thursday. And yesterday we listened to the UN speech that our president made. And basically the reason we did that was because for so many years, we've been taught the book of Revelation in a certain way. And we've had dramatizations and enactments of the events. There's a thing that they do every year called Judgment Journey, and that's kind of where they take you through an enactment of what the end times will be like. And I just thought, you know, that would be kind of interesting. But we've been focused on, you know, the end times, and we've been listening to, I'm taking a study break, and during my study break, I'm just kind of sharing with you, you know, some of the preaching messages and some of the preachers that I've enjoyed listening to through the years and have learned things from through the years. We've been listening to Rabbi Schneider. We've listened to, you know, him talk about demons and what demons are. And it's kind of like we have the right to choose. We make our choices, right? What we do every day. And a lot of the Bible parables, we hear a lot of preachers that go deep, you know, meanings of what some of these parables that Jesus taught, like, and they want to take you all around a mountain, up and down, like on a roller coaster ride, all around about what this means, that means. But many times the meaning of a parable is simple. Like the parable of the 10 virgins, you know, how there were 10 virgins and 5 were wise and 5 were foolish. Well, the only thing that distinguished the 5 wise virgins from the 5 foolish virgins was the choice they made. They, you know, and it doesn't say anything in particular about why they chose to do what they did. I mean, 5 people, they call them 5 virgins, but I'm just going to say 5 people decided to bring extra oil and 5 didn't. It was just a choice. You know, you can't, sometimes when you decide you want to do the wrong thing, okay, like good and evil or opposite extremes, okay, you decide whether you want to tell a lie or tell the truth. right? You decide that. Now, you have things around you that influence you. Well, it looks, you have influences in your life that make lying seem like the easiest thing to do, right? And that telling the truth seems like the hardest thing to do. And I'm just using lying and telling the truth, but there are other opposite extremes, you know. But really, honestly, it's lying and telling the truth. If you had to choose between telling a lie or telling the truth, honestly, they're both equally as hard to do. I mean, sometimes telling the truth has consequences. You have to be honest, you have to tell the truth. Well, there are consequences, that negative consequences that go along with that. But when you lie, there are also negative consequences that go along with that. So you suffer either way. Sometimes you have to suffer for doing what's right. I mean, if Jesus said, if someone slaps you, turn the other cheek, and they slap you again, you're suffering, right? If you punch them back, you're gonna suffer as well. So, doing the right thing sometimes hurts just as much as doing the wrong thing hurts. The only difference is doing the wrong thing leads to your destruction, and doing the right thing leads to eternal life, according to biblical teaching. So there's a reward for doing what's right. God rewards you for doing what's right. Where, according to the Bible, God punishes you for doing the wrong thing. But you suffer either way. So I'm going to share with you someone I like listening to. His name's Trey Smith. And this is pertaining to the last days, Matthew 24. And you know, last night Rabbi Snyder talked about the Feast of Trumpets and the different calendars. Okay, Rabbi Snyder talked about how the Jewish calendar, certain days on the Jewish calendar are significant. And a certain date on the Jewish calendar can fall on our Gregorian calendar, I think that's what he called it, on different days on our calendar. But we'll talk more about that later. But here is Trey Smith. All right, that was a little bit of that, and if you want to hear the rest of it, you can go on our social media site. I have it posted there. But you know what's interesting is we like to talk about little details that are mentioned in the Bible and that I've never heard. You know, I have questions that have never been answered. And here's one of the little details for me, okay? When you go back and you read the prophets, and then, you know, historically, those prophecies were fulfilled, like the things that Daniel saw, for instance, where, you know, the prophecies where it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south and how they got into this battle. Well, all of that was fulfilled with the Ptolemy dynasties. And I actually studied the fulfillment of those prophecies in history class. And Isaiah prophesied about King Cyrus hundreds of years before King Cyrus was, you know, even born. Jesus prophesied about the temple being torn down and everything, and all of that happened in 70 AD. the book of Revelation is also a prophecy. And in the book of Revelation, it talks about the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. Well, we can go back and we can see, we see how the prophets prophesied about the coming Messiah, and then the Messiah came. And we can go back now, and we can take the Bible, and we can see the prophecy, and we can go to history and see the fulfillment of the prophecies. Here's the thing with me, and I've been a big one that I've always argued, like, because I've actually seen, I've done some research, and I've seen where people have changed history. Like, they've rewritten our history and rewritten our history and rewritten our history. And it left me wondering, how do we know that what we study in history is true if every, 40 years they rewrite it or they change it just a little? So how do I know that hasn't been going on for hundreds of years? Every 30 or 40 years, they change history a little, and then they wait another 40 years and they change it a little more, and then they change it a little more. So, and here's one of the, and my argument was this. Well, the only way we can know if what we believe about our history is true is somebody would have to be around that's 300 or 400 years old to tell us, is this true or is this not true? I mean, we've got to be able to prove that what they're telling us is true or not. And here's one of the little details, okay? If we just go back to the oldest person that we know that's alive, okay, and we ask them, what do they remember? I mean, most of the time they're not really going to know for sure, but they're just going to know, like, what was going on based on what they were hearing on the news and everything, right? As far as we know, within our lifetime, what we can actually prove or disprove, there was no such thing as the nation of Israel until, what, the 1940s? So prior to the 1940s, the nation of Israel only existed in history books. Israel was not even a nation until around the 40s. Or the 60s, between the 40s and the 60s. Okay? So there was no Jerusalem. Now there's a Jerusalem, there's an old city, and there is a new city that's actually there. Now, if Jesus said, you can tell when spring's coming by the fig tree, and when the fig tree blossoms, and when you see all these things, well, if the book of Revelation says that there's a new Jerusalem, and it was written, that prophecy was written hundreds of years ago, wouldn't the fulfillment of the prophecy be the fact that there is actually a new Jerusalem there now, right now, today? It's there, right now. I mean, if you just look in the encyclopedia or look on the map or whatever, there is a new city. There is a new Jerusalem. It's there. It's in Israel. And it's only been there since, I don't know, but somewhere between the 40s and 60s. It's only been there just a few years. So this is one of those details that nobody, every other prophecy's been fulfilled. So why wouldn't they acknowledge that that's the fulfillment of this prophecy? The fact that there's an old city there with a Temple Mount and all that. That's the old city. But there's a new Jerusalem that's there, and it looks like it's got sky. It looks like a big city, like metropolitan city, something like Atlanta, New York City. It's got big high skyscrapers and everything, and it's the new city. That's what they call it, the new city. So why wouldn't that be the fulfillment of the book of Revelations? There's this little thing called a loop. L-O-O-P. And sometimes when you're dealing with audio and video, you can put it on loop, or I like to say repeat. And what that means is it just loops back around to the beginning. Once it gets to the end, it loops back around. So I kind of feel like there's the world, right? The world view, the carnal, religious systems of this world that kind of have us on loop. Like, I kept wondering, like, why in the world, and this was something I asked myself, why in the world does the book of Revelations keep starting over and over? I mean, every time America gets ready to elect a president, or every time something happens, the book of Revelation starts all over again. Like somebody just put us on loop. Like we're just running around in a circle, right? Just like they did when they were going around that mountain. They were going around that mountain. And this is why I'm studying. This is why I'm taking a study break, because I found something called the spiral dynamic model. It's the spiral dynamic integral. And what the spiral dynamic model, it was a sort of a psychological, scientific theory of the evolution of the human consciousness, okay? And all it really does, it just color codes the different levels of human consciousness and the different mindsets, right? And if you look in the book of Revelation, if you look at the last chapter where it talks about the new temple and the new city and everything, Jesus specifically and Paul specifically said that we are the temple. That we're human clay, right? We're human. We are stones, living stones. And if you think about it, it talks about the gates, right? And the gates are color-coded. And it talks about all these different gemstones, where gemstones are different colors. And if you think about different levels, right? When we draw diagrams and we try to explain things to people, and we try to shape people's understandings, we use diagrams, we use colors. You know, I worked for a company, a cable company one time. They had these different packages, and it was bronze and silver and gold and platinum. And each level had a little more and a little more and a little more, right? So you could get the bronze package, you could get and the spiral dynamic integral kind of does the same thing. It color codes our different levels of human consciousness, our different levels, right? And I honestly, my job, I believe, is to diagram the kingdom of the Lord and to get you to see that it's here. We just can't see it. We just can't, we're not aware of it. We're blinded to it. But I believe that someone could point it out to you just the same way that they teach you anything else, right? The same way you go to college, the same way you go to get training on your job. You have an instructor, and they sit there with a chalkboard or a dry erase board, and they draw a diagram for you. And they draw a pyramid, you know, and they want to explain, this is how our company, this is how the chain of command works in our company, right? And you're at the bottom, and then the CEO's at the top, right? That's usually how it works. Well, once you leave that training class, in your mind, you leave, and anytime you think about that company, from then on, you picture that pyramid or that little diagram or however it was taught to you, right? You will always keep, that will always be the mental way that you picture that company from then on. And the kingdom of the Lord is much the same way. But I think that it's kind of hard to understand the way the hierarchy of authority works in the kingdom of the Lord, because I think we've been looping. You know, they just put us on loop. And it seems like we're just kind of going around and around this mountain. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. But they keep recycling the same spiritual concepts over and over and over and over. You know, and the Apostle Paul said one time, like, by this time you should be off milk. You know. How many lessons do we need to learn about love and forgiveness? And, I mean, it gets to the point to where we hear all these preaching messages and we know them better than the preachers do. We've heard them so many times, right? How many times do they have to tell us to love and to forgive and to, you know, conduct ourselves in a certain way, and that to feel compassion towards other people? I mean, how many times do we have to be taught this? I mean, this might be our way of making it through this wilderness called the world, right? But at some point, we're supposed to graduate into seeing the Lord, right? We're supposed to be seeking Him. We're supposed to go into this promised land. And so we're gonna talk about that, because I believe that we're just kind of blinded to it because we're looping around and around and around the same things. And it's time to graduate onto something new. It's time to go on a journey. It's time to go into the promised land.
That has been the Hour of Power this morning right here on WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key. Stay tuned. We've got the Key Classifieds coming up, and Mr. Personality at 9:30, and the NPD show. Stay tuned to WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key.
WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key, Noonan. With SRN News, I'm Bob Agnew in Washington. Tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans stunned by a hurricane that crushed concrete balconies and paralyzed the island with landslides, flooding, and downed trees, about to slowly rebuild amid an economic crisis. Meanwhile, House Speaker Paul Ryan says the U.S. will be helping.
To our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico, they are right now front and center in our thoughts and in our prayers. We want them to know that the federal response will be there. We want them to know that we are thinking of them first and foremost right now as they combat this very, very dangerous hurricane.
Turks and Caicos President Tory Deal says he's been preparing for Hurricane Maria, which is expected to move near the islands later today.
Well, I'm taking all necessary precautions. I actually just got back on island, but I went down to my house to make sure everything was safe down there. Came here to the gas station, fill up my tanks. After here, I'm going to the food store, stock up on some food, and I'll be good from there.
Meanwhile, in Mexico City, the delicate effort to reach a young girl buried in the rubble of her school stretched into a day-long vigil, much of it broadcast across Mexico, as rescue workers still struggled in rain and darkness early today trying to reach the child. The sight of her wriggling fingers has become a symbol of the hope driving thousands of professionals and volunteers to work frantically at dozens of sites looking for survivors. The Food and Drug Administration issuing new warnings on Wednesday about the dangers of combining Medicaid's for opioid addiction with anxiety